Hi, this is Lorena, and I wanted to do a tutorial on how to make a quilt top that I've been working on. Now you are going to need the pattern, and the pattern is called Deck the Halls, and this is it. I thought it was really pretty. I got this pattern. You are going to need a ruler with it, which is called the Quick Curve ruler. The neat thing about if you buy the Quick Curve ruler, they have a whole bunch of patterns and designs on how to use this ruler. And here's another pattern. So this is another pattern. So if you do purchase the ruler does come with a whole bunch of different patterns that you could try out. Now, when I started doing the quilt top, I was going initially to follow the pattern that I purchased, but I decided to kind of change it up a little bit, and because I changed it up a little bit, I had to change the way I put the quilt top together. Now, what I'm going to do in this tutorial is I am going to show you what some of the cutting instructions are, meaning how you need to cut the blocks. I am going to show you how to cut with the ruler. I am going to show you how to put the C, D, E blocks together, and aside from that, I'm not going to tell you anything more. But if you do get the pattern and get the ruler, you will be able to do the quilt top exactly how I did it. And I'm just going to share what I did. I literally took out 4 rows out of the quilt block, the quilt top. They had the C, D, and E quilt blocks, which are a lot bigger quilt blocks, and then they had a small row of rectangles. They were 5 by 10.5 rectangles, and they were pieced in between the bigger quilt blocks, which you wouldn't know that unless you have your instructions. I took those rows completely out. I am going to share with you how I changed the color variation, and so if you do get the ruler and the pattern, you will be able to do the quilt top exactly like I did. So this is a 6.5 inch strip, and so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and here's my half. And then after you cut your 6.5 inch strip, you're supposed to make these into 6.5 by 6.5 inch squares. Here's 6 and then my half. I'm using the squares 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and here's my half mark. There's my 6.5 inch squares. There you go. And you're going to do that with all of your pieces. So I use this grid line, and I also use this grid line to make sure that I have my fabric square. I also, on this, I marked my 3.5 inch point and my 8.5 and my 6.5 inch. And I'm going to line up this point to this point, and then line up this point. So I think it's right there. Make sure your rotary blade is really sharp. I'm having problems. Someone said to use a smaller rotary blade. And there's your 2 pieces cut. And so let me show you what I did. I changed it up a little bit to make it totally different. I went ahead and I added a blue, and I added a purple, and I made one of these, one of these, and that's what you're going to make right there. And so, like in this one, these variegate a little bit, so usually she said solid, so this is what this is going to look like. Just like that. And then, and this is what this one looks like. This, after you sew it, that's what it's going to look like. You only need, she said, you only needed 2 of these and just 1 color of this to get this this visual. But I decided that I wanted to not waste one color because I wasn't going to use one of these. So I went ahead and I added both of them to the variation, and I'll show you what that will look like. I'm going to show you how to make this one. So you're going to need your neutral, and you're going to need your color. And you need to mark it a 1/2 inch. Get your ruler and mark it a 1/2 inch in. Okay, so here I have my Elmer's glue stick, and what I'm doing is on the edge of the curve area, it doesn't matter which one, I'm just putting just a little bit of glue stick on there. What I like about this, it gives me a lot of control on the sewing machine, and it just kind of makes the fabric a little tacky when I'm sewing it. And here you line curve to curve on your 1/2 inch mark. And here you see me just lining curve to curve. It doesn't matter. You're going to do this with all your colors. And here I'm getting started. And you notice I rub the top of the fabric so it's a little tacky to the fabric is sticking to each other. And then I'm just going to grab the edge of the fabric like that, and I'm just going to let the machine run. Then I'm going to pause, and I'm going to rub that fabric, and it's going to stick together. And here you see me sew a little bit, pause, rub the fabric, sew a little bit, and I'm going to stop and then rub the fabric a little bit more. And you're going to see me also run the sewing machine, stop, stick the fabric together, and just keep doing that. Initially, I had to do this so that I could do the curves and make sure I had a 1/4 seam allowance. This is the best way to do curves without having to use pins. And it's the cleanest technique, meaning you get that perfect fourth. But after a period of time, let me just say, I didn't have to do this. After a while, I got the rhythm of it. And so initially, it was just for me to get started. So here you see one of those squares that we sewed together, and I have my iron and I'm ironing everything nice and flat. And we're going to go ahead and go to where we cut this little square. Now right here it's 5.5, and I have to move my ruler to the other 5.5 position. And it's a little bit weird cutting this way, but this is what the instructions said. And then you cut off all the excess. So you make sure where you have that seam line is at 5.5 on the top, and where you have the seam line is 5.5 at the bottom. And here I'm measuring, and I'm doing the same thing on the opposite end. I'm making sure that seam line is at 5.5 on that corner, and I'm also putting the seam line at 5.5 on this corner, and I'm going to go ahead and trim all the extra fabric off. If you've done this right, you should have enough fabric to fit the whole space, and this little square or block becomes 5.5. And here I'm going to show you what C, D, and E blocks look like, and we're going to start working on block C. Now this is block C, and what I did is I got my 2 colors and I alternated them. And so the way you alternate them, that's up to you. And here I'm making my block, and I'm going to go ahead and sew and make sure that that seam are nice and snug together so that it makes that beautiful point that you want. And I'm using my sewing machine. I'm sewing a 1/4 of a seam all the way down. And then you see me grab the other piece, and the same thing, I'm making sure that area is nice and snug together so it gives me that beautiful point that I want, and I'm going to go ahead and seam all the way down. Now you see 2 blocks on top of each other because to make 1 row, you need to make 2 of each individual blocks that I'm going to show you. And right here, the center seam, make sure you snug them together and go ahead and sew a nice straight seam. And this is what we call block C. After you iron everything and have it nice and pressed, make sure you mark each individual blocks, because D and E are a little bit confusing to follow. And one of the ways you can know that this is the one D for me is I had a darker blue on the bottom corner. And just notice that I alternated the colors. And now we're going to go ahead and put those blocks together like we did block C. And of course, we're doing a 4 seam allowance, sewing all the way down. And the neat thing about these, you don't have to worry about those little intersections snugging up, because on this one, you don't have to, except right here in the center. So here you see me just fiddling with the fabric and just making sure it's nice and snug together. And I'm going to go ahead and sew a 1/4 of a seam. And you're going to need 2 of these to make 1 row. And you're just going to go ahead and sew all the way down and iron it nice and flat. And remember, make sure you label each individual blocks, because after this point it gets kind of confusing. So here's my block E. Same process. I'm using the first block that I did to follow the same pattern. So once you make a decision on your color choices and how you want to alternate them, make sure you stay consistent so that you can get that beautiful design that I'm going to show you at the end. So here you see me getting those 2 pieces together. Of course, I'm going to sew the nice straight seam, a 1/4 of a seam, and I'm going to sew the other piece together. And just like we did on the other blocks, we're going to sew the center seam and make sure those seams are nice and snug and straight. So here you see me finishing the quilt block. I'm going to make sure I iron it and label it. And this was what 1 row looks like. Now I want to share with you that this is how I pieced my row, and I followed the pattern's instructions. The instructions also change. So each row you're going to place them differently, and you're going to alternate them some. And this is what 2 rows look like, and this is what the 3rd row looks like. In a minute, I'm going to show you a close-up of what this looks like. I think this is a beautiful quilt. I really do hope you like this tutorial, and I hope you give this ruler and this pattern a try. They really do have some really wonderful patterns, and I'll see you next time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.